Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Jennifer Harper and I head up the coaching team here at Stay Nimble. The topic for our webinar today is parent returners to work. So we will be talking about the many challenges faced by parents when they decide to go back into the workplace, whether that's immediately after having a baby or after having taken some additional time out for staying at home or for other reasons. Bringing children into the world in general is a joyous occasion, but when juggling all of life's other commitments, parents and those around them can find themselves dealing with lots of new situations, such as problems around sourcing suitable childcare, feeling extremely torn when leaving children in that childcare, as well as circumstances such as asking for time off work to sort of manage around school, nursery holidays, or even just trying to reduce your hours in order to obtain a little bit of work-life balance. So today, a lot of these questions will be discussed, and we hope you will gain some helpful pieces of advice to help you move forward. First of all, I'll just give you a little bit of background about Stay Nimble. Hopefully you're all very familiar with the platform anyway. But just to remind you that Stay Nimble Facility is a career development platform, and it's there to be used regardless of your situation. We've had lots of people spend time developing their skills, redefining their strengths, and really reevaluating their lives in general during maternity leave or when they have returned to work after having children. So remember, there's many great resources on the platform that are there to help and support you 24 hours a day. So it's very accessible. We also have our career coaches who are all CDI qualified and registered, and they're all very, very happy to work with you on a one-to-one basis to ensure you get the support you need for your own personal situation. We also have one of our coaches here with us today, Georgie Blackburn. But before we properly introduce our speakers, I would just like to cover a few of our basic housekeeping rules for during today's webinar. So we're going to have two presentations and then the question and answer session. If everybody could just keep their microphones on mute during the presentations, that would be really appreciated. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, then please pop them into the chat facility, and Lucy Guest, who's with us from the marketing team, will collect those and we'll get to those during the Q&A session at the very end. Also, it was just to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded, so those members who can't make it today can access it later from the Stay Nimble platform. So if you would prefer to have your camera off, then please do that. That's not a problem at all. So just quickly moving on to what we're going to cover today, looking at the agenda. As I said, we've got two guests with us today, Georgie Blackburn, who's Stay Nimble career coach, and Emma Roberts, who is an employment lawyer. Georgie will cover lots about the natural emotional and physical changes and challenges that parents face when going through pregnancy, maternity leave, and then returning into the workplace. She will also look at how you can start to plan ahead for those many changes that will present themselves as you start to prepare to return to work, and the questions you may find yourself asking of yourself as you consider other ways of working or looking at other types of employment as well. Georgie will also quickly talk about the benefit of working one-to-one with a coach during this transitional period as well. Emma is going to explore basically your statutory rights as an employee when returning to your existing job, or if you choose not to return to your post. She will also look at what health and safety provisions your employer should be making for you, particularly in circumstances where you're breastfeeding. In addition, Emma will outline your unpaid parental leave entitlement and also what to do if you need to take time off to care for dependents. And all of this will be followed by your questions during that Q&A session. So we've got quite a lot to get through during this hour. So let's meet our guests. Georgie, can I please ask you very quickly to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, certainly. Hello, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here today. And thank you, Jennifer. As she mentioned, I'm Georgie, and I'm a career coach, the newest career coach, actually, for Stay Nimble. So I may have met some of you already through our coaching conversations. But I've also got my own sort of coaching business. So I've been working as a freelance coach since 2018, and I've supported many people back into work after a period of leave, maybe just transitioning into a new career, might be going back to work after being a parent or some other situation, and the difficulties that people can face when they've had some time out. So it's very much part of my background. I'm also a mum to 2 children, so I've gone back into work myself after having 2 kids, and I know what it can feel like and some of the difficulties there. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you about some of those issues here today. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Georgie. Thank you. Emma, I know you're very, very busy, so thank you so much for giving your time to us today. Can I please ask you also to introduce yourself to everybody?
Of course. Firstly, thank you very much for having me. I'm a specialist employment and a commercial lawyer. I've been doing employment for the last 8 years, but in the last couple of years, I've really tried to carve out a niche in terms of representing women who are pregnant and returning to the workplace, and just making the law a bit more accessible. It seems that we make it very difficult for people to actually find out what they're entitled to. And I've tried very hard over the last couple of years to make it just that bit easier, so people know really the basics that they are entitled to.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've got a wealth of knowledge with us here today. So we're looking forward to this. Very quickly, just before we actually start with the presentations, could we get the next slide, please, Lucy? Thank you so much. Just looking at what will happen after the actual webinar. Any questions that we don't have time to get to, we will be providing written answers for those, but hopefully we will get to them all today. Lucy will also be preparing an ebook with various resources from this session that will be distributed later on as well. And as I mentioned already, the recording of this webinar will be available for you to listen to again as a resource on the Stay Nimble platform. So we'll start with Georgie. If we can hear your tips and advice, please, for parent returners to work.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so depending on your situation, maybe you're on a period of maternity or paternity leave right now, or perhaps you've taken a longer break from work to raise your family or for another situation. So perhaps you're just contemplating what to do right now. So why might you need support in returning to work? So there are many reasons really, but when you consider that 3/4 of most people's career actually happens after having children on average, and that actually 60% of mothers look to change careers after maternity leave. It's a staggering amount really, isn't it? Which just shows kind of how much people might change and people's situation, the effect of having children, what that does to you. So despite all of that and people wanting to change and so much of the career happening after childbirth, fewer than 1 in 5 women actually feel confident about returning to work. And it can be really, really hard to balance those different conflicts, your different priorities, your changes in values. So really, I think that's why it's important to reach out and to be able to have some support at this time. So I hope that to be able to provide some practical tips of how you might approach a return to work, and also let you know how you can access further support as well. So just a little bit about the kind of changes that you might experience or have experienced following childbirth. You may yourself have felt a lot of fear or anxiety or even panic when separated from your baby at first. And this is really very normal, and it's actually due to many changes in your brain function that happens as a result of having children. So things like your empathy, anxiety, social interaction, these are all areas of the brain that are really strengthened as a result of having children. You are actually programmed to focus on and track your baby, and that can cause to a lack of other mental focus, and lead to feelings, difficult feelings about returning to work. Breastfeeding, if that applies to you, that can really amplify these changes as well. The difference of neurochemical pathways that are produced as a result of breastfeeding, huge increases in oxytocin. It does alter your responses and your priorities. So it's therefore really common to experience feelings, difficult feelings when returning to work. If I could have the next slide, please, Lucy. So it does affect everyone differently, and I'm not here to say that, oh, you should be feeling this, or this is, this is a feeling that you should be experiencing. But it is very natural for many people to feel overwhelmed and afraid, and to think, how on earth will I be able to leave my baby? How am I going to be able to cope with all the demands of juggling and looking after children, but also, being able to switch your brain into a gear of coping with being back in the workplace? Many people on maternity leave might just sort of be in denial, and I remember thinking, oh, it's okay, I've got nearly a year, and then suddenly the time's creeping up, and you just hope that that time that you'll be able to stay with your baby, and that you hope that the issues will go away. You can feel very torn about what to do in terms of your financial situation and the need to go back to work, but then the emotional side of wanting to stay with your baby or your family. Obviously, the tiredness, lack of sleep can make it even harder to be more rational, and you might be having very emotional responses, so that can lead to exaggerated difficulties, really. I think many people will relate to feeling a loss of self, like, who was I before I had children, and how can I possibly contemplate that going back? I'm a different person now. What will it be like to going back? And then it's very natural to feel isolated. Maybe if you've got a partner and they went back to work, after 2 weeks, and you've been left at home with the baby, and obviously those feelings are going to be highly exaggerated during the COVID period, and that we're in now. It's really, really difficult to think of a time of how you can go back into work, or maybe your work is going to be from home, and how you're going to manage and juggle looking after your child in the home as well as going back to work. So all of these issues are really, really common. So I can't promise to be able to solve all the issues here today in this webinar, but I can identify some steps that you could take to start to approach things, to hopefully ease that transition, or to just start to consider things. And I'll go through each of these 5 steps, including planning ahead, using your network, understanding how your values might have changed, recognizing your own skills and strengths, and how you could approach maybe upskilling if you feel that you need some extra skills, or getting to something transition to going back into the workplace. Okay, so the first step then, about planning ahead. So if you're in work and going to be going on maternity leave soon, perhaps, or you're newly on maternity leave, then I think it's really important to think about things early on. Having a handover period. I remember being really reassured that I could hand over my work to somebody that I was going to trust, and that I knew would look after things until I returned. That was a huge sense of relief for me. You may be aware of the keeping in touch days that your employer needs to provide. If you'd like to take advantage of them, they can be a great way to make you feel that you are, to help ease that transition, really, by making use of those days during maternity leave. It can really help to think ahead about your finances. What do you need to earn? How will your financial situation change as a result of having a baby? Could you afford to work part-time if you didn't want to go back to full-time hours, for example? I think also having childcare kind of booked and looked at early in advance, rather than leaving it to the late stages of your maternity leave, can really, really help to reduce stress. Many childcare places do have to be booked very far advance, even perhaps before you've had the baby. So, you know, it would be awful if you were kind of trying to go back and then all the spaces were filled. So just thinking about what sort of, whether it be a nursery, a childminder, whether you have family that can help out, but trying to look at these things and think ahead can help you feel more in control, I think, of the situation. And then anything else that helps to keep you connected, either with your workplace, with previous work colleagues, with friends, with family. These things are all good and make the transition easier. So secondly then, about using your network, I think really to try and sort all of this out on your own, whether you've been out of work for a long time or are newly on maternity leave, it can be really hard to try and do that and think that this is all on my shoulders. It's impossible really. And I think to relate to people that are going through a similar thing to you can be hugely reassuring, and to see that it's not failure to ask for help or to need for help. So that might be in the form of family and friends for support, both practical maybe to help you out, if you're fortunate enough to have family, friends close by that can help you, but the emotional side as well, to feel that you can talk about your feelings and things that you're going through. I mean, I would have found it really hard, I think, if I hadn't been part of any parenting groups. So they are, you know, my friends now, you know, are still friends that I met at some of the play groups and NCT. So, you know, if you are hopefully now being able to go back into some of these more social situations, that can really help to meet with like-minded people that are going through similar things to you. And I think the online support networks that are out there are fantastic now and may have taken the place of many face-to-face groups. So there's Mumsnet, there's also the Family Lives Forum as well, which depending, that can be for any different stage, whether you've got teenagers, a young baby, whatever stage you're at, they can be hugely important. Sometimes reaching out to people that you don't know, but online can feel a bit easier to do as well. So keeping in touch with your work colleagues, you know, I think just really to familiarise yourself or to get a little bit, take a little step back into that world again, can help to know, you know, what's going on and what's happening, help you feel more connected. And I think that just that general point, really, seeing how other people have made it work, you know, speak to people that have done lots of different ways, different models of going back to work or not going back to work. How do other people do it? That can be very reassuring and comforting at this time. So thirdly then, understanding your values. So values, the things that are important to you, the things that you might live by, or the things that, you know, you hold dear to you. And it's really natural that your values will change as a result of becoming a parent. So I think to take a little bit of time to reflect on that, and reflect on how becoming a parent might have changed your view of the world of work, your priorities. It's really important to think about that. And, you know, how are your values represented, both at home, the family, maybe in your work that you're still doing, or you know, maybe your work ideas have changed, or through your interests and extra things that you do in your own time. How are these currently represented, and are there any gaps in those? So maybe, you know, the thought of going back to work would change, you know, would mean that you couldn't see your values represented in the same way. How would that change? And could there be any small changes be made at work so that you could have that different work-life balance, perhaps? Okay, so once you've spent a bit of time to reflect on that, there's another really important aspect, is to think about your strengths. So have the next slide, please. And so, you know, it can really be, it can be a really big shift and sort of lack of confidence. It's very easy to lose your confidence if you're on maternity leave or if you've been out of work for a long period of time. So I think to start to recognise those again and think, well, you know, I do still have those skills that I had when I was working haven't disappeared, and to think again about, you know, what it is that you're good at. and what skills you enjoy using as well. So maybe looking back at your CV, thinking back at, what did I actually do? What skills was I using on a regular basis? But also to recognise that you'll have gained many, many more skills and personal qualities as a result of having a family, having children or a child. So, what skills have you been using since then? And I think many people really underplay those and think that they're not that important and that an employer wouldn't want to know about those. But actually, if you consider the amount of maybe multitasking you've been doing, perhaps working to deadlines, communicating with different people, using your prioritizing skills, there'll be many more as well. So just really, really have a think about those that you're using and maybe write them down so that you're actually really like saying, yeah, this is something I am good at. There are many skills assessments. You might have already done some. You could revisit them as well through the Stay Nimble website. So maybe have a look at those to remind yourself. Many members will say, gosh, yeah, I hadn't realised, I'd forgotten I'd got all these skills. So that can be a good way to tap into that again. So it can be, if you've had a really long period out of work or out of your traditional work, it may be worth thinking about whether there are any gaps in your skills, any things that you'd like to get better at or improve on as a result of or when you're contemplating going back into the workplace. So volunteering can be a fantastic way of starting to develop some further skills. And that could be something, within your kind of network at the moment, maybe doing a little bit of organising an event or something through your play group that you're part of, and nursery. Perhaps you could link into doing some charity work. I've been doing a lot for the NHS and stuff in my community. So perhaps you could consider taking on something small like that. It doesn't have to be a huge undertaking, but just can be starting to develop further skills. Maybe asking your employer if there's a small project you could start to do to ease yourself back into work. Sometimes if you reach out and think about your friends, maybe they've got their own business or something, perhaps you could do something with them, help them with their website, or help something or other that's going on in your network already. And you could consider taking an online course to actually learn something completely new or develop some knowledge about a different area to see whether you like it, see whether you're interested in it. There are many, I think through the whole pandemic, there have been many more online courses available that are free. And there are lots and lots on the Learning Hub on a huge range of topics on the Stay Nimble website. So do have a look at those if that's of interest. And I think, that can all help, not only with transitioning into a new career, but to really help you gain confidence as well. Okay, so there are also sort of further things that you could do. You could consider doing a work placement. Again, it can be really unsettling and thinking, I just can't see myself being back in work. And I know I worked with somebody that had been out for 10 years out of work to raise their family, but she was a professional engineer, but she just was desperate to go back to work, really wanted to use her technical and other skills, but couldn't see how she could do it. So she actually, by working together, she got on one of these returnships. I don't know if you've ever heard of that term, but it is, like a professional period of work experience, a professional internship where you're paid. They're usually between 3 and 6 months in length. Some are a bit shorter, some are a bit longer. And they are designed specifically for people to try and get back into the workplace. So you're doing actual real work tasks, but that work is supplemented by doing further training courses. You get support, mentoring as well. So you're not just left to it. And at the end of that, both you and your employer can decide whether there's a permanent place for you at the end. And I think 80% of people do gain permanent work with their employer after a returnship, so it's a really high rate. But it may not be, perhaps you don't have that professional background, or that doesn't feel like it's the right model for you. It may be worth still looking out for a period of work experience, less formal than that, even just going to, see what somebody does for the day and to learn more about it, or a shorter internship that you could do. is a fantastic way to kind of envisage yourself and to really see what a different work environment might be like. So the benefits of that, really, to try it before you commit to it, to see if it works out for you and your family, and you know, if it doesn't, then you've lost nothing, but you've gained an awful lot for your CV, for if you do want to go back next time. So I think it's also important to recognise that there are many different models of working. It doesn't just have to be the way you worked before maternity leave or paternity leave. So there are many part-time working situations. I know I went back part-time afterwards in a job share situation, actually, which was really nice, because it meant that, you know, I knew that the second half of the week or the rest of my work was being done by somebody else. But there are also many flexible working arrangements that you could tap into. So perhaps to work things around hours of nursery or school can often be possible with many employers. You may want to consider self-employment as a possibility of making things work, of having the ultimate flexibility of doing things the way you want to do it. There's a big rise in portfolio careers as well now, and that's really where you might have work from many different streams. Some might be from self-employment, some might be from an employed contract, maybe many different types of work if you've got different skills in different areas. So that's, you know, a model that you could consider as well. And you know, don't forget, you can also consider, if you don't feel that you want to go back to work straight away, maybe taking talking to your employer about an extended period of leave or a career break to help you make that choice at the right time for you. Okay, so yeah, that's just a few ways then things to consider. But you know, I recognise it's really hard to sort of even to try and approach all of that sometimes. So coaching can be a really, really important way to help you make sense of things. And I think there's a huge value in talking to somebody that's outside of your family and friends sort of unit, that's impartial and objective, removed from the emotional side of things, perhaps. A coach might help to sort of gently challenge your assumptions or beliefs. For example, if your parents think that, oh no, you should stay at home, and that's really wrong to put your child into childcare, then you could talk that through with your coach, and they might challenge that view. Can also help to really work through some conflicting feelings that you've got from both the more rational and the more emotional. And many people say that they've gained a lot of clarity from working with a coach by being able to talk things and work things through. We can use tools and exercises to help, you know, really go into some of those things that I've mentioned. For example, understanding what your values are, assessing your skills, and really seeing how they can be relevant to different jobs. So there can be some very practical things that you can do through coaching. And then, of course, if you are ready to go back into work, if you haven't done it for many years, it can be really hard to think, how I haven't got a CV. You know, I'm so long since I've had an interview. How do I do that? And your coach can really help you by, you know, doing maybe a mock interview, helping you to see where you can find vacancies and to craft your CV so that it can be a really powerful tool for you and help you get maximum success of getting back into work, hopefully. Okay, so I've put on these slides here that you'll be able to access some useful websites that you can use for recruitment to try and find opportunities. Many of those are recruitment sites that specialise in you know, part-time work or you know, working for certain hours of the day, women returners as well, flexible jobs, working mums. So there's some fantastic sites that you could, or recruitment companies that you could access and join up with. There are also good tools there for returnships as well. There's some .gov websites to help with your, you know, what your options are, maternity and paternity leave, statutory requirements. There's a childcare calculator as well to help you work out the finances, and then understanding different childcare options. Okay, so I hope you found that useful today, the perspective on, you know, going back into work. So I think without further ado, probably hand over to Emma.
Thanks, Georgie. I want to start by saying I'm going to cover the headline topics today in terms of what you're legally entitled to. I could do a two-day presentation on it, to be honest. So there are a lot of other areas that could be covered. If anything is raised and you do have any further questions or it's fact specific to you, by all means, please do reach out to me at the end. The last slide will be my contact details. Like I said at the start, I know it's not as accessible. Cost when it comes to legal is a huge thing. And if you do have any queries, please don't feel that you can't reach out, because there's plenty of other people like me that will happily give you the time of day to give you peace of mind, because I know it's a really stressful time and a really difficult time. But I want to start by talking about actually returning to work and the processes you have to follow to make sure that you're on the right side of the law, but also to make sure that you're not causing any difficulties or issues between you and your employer. So in terms of providing notice to actually return to work, when you first ask for maternity leave, your employer will give you a date for you to return. They'll assume that you'll be away until that date unless you tell them otherwise. But don't worry if you do want to change your mind. It is just a case of providing enough notice. So write to your new employer and give them plenty of time. So if you want to end your leave sooner and return to work sooner, you've got to give at least 8 weeks notice before the new end date. If, however, you want to end your leave later, you've got to tell your employer 8 weeks before your original end date. What I would say on that point is 8 weeks is the minimum. If you decide much sooner that you don't want to return on the original date, or that you want more time off, the more notice you give, the easier your life's going to be, and the easier it'll be for your employer to plan ahead. But that's sort of the first tick box in terms of returning to work, is to give the correct notice. In terms of your actual right to return to work, you have a right to return to work after your maternity leave. Sorry, Lucy, can I have the next slide? Thank you. The headline is you have the right to return to work after your maternity leave. However, the position differs depending on whether you've been on maternity leave for 26 weeks or less, or more than 26 weeks. So you're entitled to return to the same job after maternity leave if you've been away 26 weeks or less. So your pay and terms and conditions must be exactly the same, if not better, than if you hadn't have gone on maternity leave. So for example, they can offer you a wonderful promotion with better terms, but you can't be treated any less favourably because you've been on maternity leave. From a legal standpoint, it's unfair dismissal, it's potentially discrimination if your employer says you can't return to the same job. If, however, you've been on maternity leave for more than 26 weeks, the position is slightly different. So, as I've said on the screen, they can say that you can't return to the same job if your employer says that it's not reasonably practicable. Obviously, that's quite wide, and what does that mean? It is very difficult for your employer to say that you can't return to the same position unless something has happened, such as a complete restructure of the business, and a lot of people are returning on different jobs. In that scenario, it might be fair for your employer to say that. However, they can offer you a different job if, say, your job still exists, but they've offered it to somebody else whilst you've been on maternity leave. If your job would still exist if you hadn't have gone on maternity leave. So that's to cover a scenario where you go on leave and your role is put up for redundancy. The new job isn't something you could do. So they can't come back and say, we're offering you a new job, but it's not in your skill set, because that's just not fair on you. And in that case, they can't do that. And if the new job has worse conditions than before, so say you used to work part-time and they say that the job is now full-time, again, there's a reason that you were doing that as a part-time role in the first place, and that has to be respected. So I would stress on this point, if you're returning to work and your employer says to you that you can't return to the same role, I really would get some legal advice, because it is entirely case specific, and it's unusual and highly unlikely that your employer will actually be able to give a valid reason for this, but unfortunately it crops up quite a lot. So I would pick up the phone, get some free advice, and just triple check before you do anything in relation to that. So moving then on to actually going back into the workplace, as Georgie touched on before, keeping in touch days are a wonderful idea, one from the perspective of just getting you back into the workplace, helping you not feel as isolated. And it's a long time not to do your job, so it just gives you that confidence to go back in and, you know, just remind you and get back into that flow. So you can agree to work for your employer for up to 10 days during your maternity leave, and that won't interrupt your maternity leave or have an impact on your maternity pay. And you should, any work that you do, regardless of how long you do it for, so say that you went into work on a Monday for 2 hours, that would class as a full keeping in touch day. They don't add up, and, you know, say you worked 8 hours in a working day, it doesn't matter. If you go in and do anything, a short bit of training, you were going for a meeting, that is one of your days covered off. You have to agree your keeping in touch days with your employer. They can't force you to do them, but you can't also enforce them as well. It's got to be mutual, that you both agree to them, and you can arrange to do your keeping in touch days for any time other than those first 2 weeks, because those first 2 weeks are protected in that you have to take that as maternity leave. But other than that, it's entirely up to you, with your employer's blessing, when you take them. And you should be paid for your keeping in touch days. How much you actually receive for them depends on what your contract of employment says, but the bottom line is it has to be at least the minimum wage. So moving on to flexible working. Flexible working has massively increased over the last couple of months, purely due to COVID. It used to be a statutory right that people on maternity would usually request it. Now a lot more individuals are requesting it, so it's really important that everybody understands when they can ask for it, how you're eligible, and your employers when they can say no and when they really do have to accept it. So you can ask for flexible working if you've worked for the same employer for at least 26 weeks. You have to have worked there for 26 weeks, and you can't have made one in the past 12 months. After the 12 months, you can request again, but you have to have a 12-month break between asking. Usually, if you make a flexible working request and it's accepted, it's a permanent change to your terms and conditions. So really think about the long-term impact of requesting this. Once you've done it kind of thing, and your terms will be permanently affected. So I would really stress that you ask your employer to have a trial period. A 4, 6, 8 week trial period is, you're well within your right to ask for it. It might tell you whether it's actually the right decision for you, and also it's a nice easing in for your employer to either distribute your work or just to get the team used to you working under this flexible working arrangement. So when you actually make your flexible working request, there's a certain number of things that your employer has to do to follow that process. They should first of all arrange a meeting to discuss it with you, mainly just to understand why you actually want to work flexibly, because if they can understand why you want to do it, they're a lot more likely to grant it if they can understand the reasons behind it. They have to give you a reason within 3 months. 3 months from the employee side seems like an awfully long time. The reason it is 3 months is purely because if you hold a really important position, integral position within that company, they're going to have to sort out a lot of logistics in terms of where your work goes, how it's passed, who handles it when you're not there. But a decision has to be made in writing to you within 3 months. And they also, if they refuse your request, they have to give you reasons. They can't simply just say, we've refused it, thanks very much. They've got to detail the actual business reasons for why they've refused it. If they refuse it and you're unhappy with either how the process was followed, say they took 12 months to make a decision and they told you verbally, not in writing, or you're just unhappy with the decision, you can appeal it. And I strongly would advise appealing it, because a different person should hear your appeal, and you never know who that other person is going to be that actually could find a solution, and you end up ultimately getting your request granted. From a legal point of view, you shouldn't be treated unfairly for making that request. for example, they can't, if you go up for promotion, they can't say that you can't have that promotion because ultimately you wanted to work flexibly. They have to treat you as if ultimately that request had never been made. So moving on to if you don't plan to actually return to work after your leave. If you decide not to go back to the job, the position is no different than if you were going to terminate your contract anyway. So look at your contract of employment. It should tell you how much notice you've got to give your employer. If there's nothing in your contract, the usual position is to give at least a week's notice. Again, this is the point where I'd be picking up the phone, triple checking with a legal advisor. They'll be able to tell you there and then how much notice you've got to give, because 2 reasons. If you give the wrong amount of notice and you've given less notice, you're in breach of your contract, and there's all sorts of repercussions from that. But also, it just makes your life easier to have a smooth transition when leaving your employer, to just follow it by the book, to do it right. You'll have the peace of mind that you've done it correctly. So I really would stress that you pick up the phone at that point. If you hand your notice in and you're leaving, make sure you get paid for any holidays that you have left, and triple check that that is including the time that you've accrued when you've been on maternity leave, because you carry on building your holiday when you're on leave, and a lot of people forget that, and that could add up to quite a substantial amount that then should be added onto your package at the end when you walk away. And the flip side of the coin is check whether you need to pay back any maternity leave. Now, the standard position is if you've been getting statutory maternity pay, you don't have to pay anything back, whether you return or don't return. If, however, you're given additional maternity pay because your employer has a policy whereby they bump it up and they give you a little bit extra, their policy might say that you have to have returned and worked so many weeks after that leave before, if you don't, you have to then hand the money back. So just triple check that policy if you are given any extra maternity pay. And it's a good idea to consider any handover. Again, you can use your keeping in touch days for this. Whilst it seems sometimes just an extra stress, it really isn't, and it'll really just help you leave that relationship on a good note. Moving forward, at the end of the day, everybody wants a glowing reference and things like that. Offering to do a handover, whether your employer wants it or not, really does make all the difference. So moving on to postnatal care and breastfeeding. The law is actually pretty silent on women's rights around breastfeeding. It is usually the health and safety guidance that covers this off. So, but if you're breastfeeding and you've given birth less than 26 weeks ago, you have the same health and safety protection as when you were pregnant at work. So your employer has to assess the health and safety risks that you're exposed to and either remove those risks or change your condition so you aren't exposed to them. So if you're breastfeeding, your employer is required to undertake a risk assessment. That isn't usually something they will do off their own back. So, because again, it's just another level of admin for them to do. And so I would really push them and remind them that they've got that duty to do an assessment. And they've also got to provide private rest facilities. So the health and safety guidance specifically recommends that employers must provide a clean, healthy and safe environment for women who are breastfeeding, and also suitable access to a private room to express and store milk in an appropriate refrigerator. Again, your employer usually won't go out of their way to make this happen because they won't presume that you are breastfeeding. So before you return to work, even give them plenty of notice, contact that person that, whether it's HR or whether it's your line manager, contact them to just give them the heads up to say, this is what I'm going to need. Please, can you let me know what you're going to provide? Because if you turn up on your first day back and ask for it, there's going to be all hosts of panicking going on. So make sure you give them that notice. So one, you don't feel embarrassed and like you're making their life difficult, because remember, you're entitled to this. You're not the one that's putting them out, but you will have to give them that little nudge just to remind them. So your leave rights as a parent. These next 2 slides, I'm going to cover 2 separate leave entitlements that usually people don't know they're entitled to, and they make the world of difference when just to those little things in life where you feel you need a bit of time off, you've got these 2 rights to protect you. So the first is parental leave. So if you've worked for your employer for at least 1 year, you have the right to unpaid time off to look after your children. And you can take 18 weeks unpaid leave before your child is 18. You don't have to take it all in one chunk. You can separate that out as much as you want, as long as you give them notice that you're taking it, and you've got to give them at least 21 days notice that you want to take some parental leave. The difficulty is parental leave is unpaid, so you will need to factor that in if you're going to take the time off work. Most employees take that time off because of their children's welfare. So it tends to be things like spending more time with their children, looking at a new school, settling children into new childcare arrangements, and just spending more time with family, visiting grandparents, etc. So if grandparents live, quite a way away, you can take that time off to go visit the grandparents, to have some time to yourself, to just settle the children in. That's absolutely fine. You're entitled to that right. A lot of people don't take it because it's unpaid, but it is really worth knowing it's there. If you just need that week off to settle a child in that's not reacting to a new school well, you're fully entitled to that. And time off for dependents. This is one that is rarely relied on because as a culture, if say your child has an accident at school at 4 p.m, we're very ingrained in that mindset of can I leave an hour early and I'll make the time up tomorrow, or I'll do a longer day tomorrow, because we never like taking time off. But really the time off for dependents is there for emergencies such as that. So if you're an employee, you're entitled to reasonable time off to deal with unexpected problems or emergencies with close family members who depend on you. Reasonable time off. Reasonable is one of those words that lawyers throw around left, right and centre, but nobody actually knows what it means. The word reasonable is used for those occasions where you get an employee that takes every Friday afternoon off and says that it's dependent leave. It's to protect employers so that they can turn it down and say, no, I'm sorry, because they're suspicious about the circumstances. If, however, every couple of months you need an afternoon off for dependence leave, that's absolutely fine. And again, if you find yourself in a situation where your employer is refusing that because it's not reasonable, pick up the phone and check, because it is entirely dependent on case law and other cases that have happened. And the best people to ask are people like myself that do it day in, day out, that could just say, well, actually, a new case has come through the tribunal recently, and that's entirely reasonable, and you need to push back on that. So have a think about, what is reasonable, and the odd day off here and there is entirely reasonable. You won't be paid unless your contract of employment says so. So check your contract. And again, there's no set amount of time you can take off. What I would say is people tend to take dependent leave if somebody gets ill or is injured, somebody passes away, care arrangements fall through last minute, or you need to deal with an unexpected incident at school, say that your child's fallen over. A close family member is a defined term. So a close family member means a child, husband, wife, civil partner, cohabiting partner, or parent. Someone who depends on you can be anyone who lives with you, unless they're a lodger or a tenant, they don't count, or someone who relies on you, such as an elderly or disabled relative, or even neighbour. If you have an elderly neighbour that relies on you solely, they're covered as well. And I would just think, finally, taking all those rights into account, there is quite a lot out there that people aren't usually aware that they're entitled to, and it will be case specific based on your circumstances. And there's a lot of people out there that will be willing to give you the time of day to answer those quick questions that you've got, because you control the internet for as long as you want, but usually what you find is the sources all say different things because they're all written by different people. And, I would lean on us as the experts to actually just pick up the phone and get that advice. My contact details are on the next slide. I'm always happy to pick up emails. I'm always happy to give my time for circumstances like this, because I know cost usually does get in the way with issues like this. But if it gives you that peace of mind that you've had your question answered, always happy to help.
Thank you, Emma. That was extremely informative. Thank you so much. I've actually learned quite a few things from your presentation there, so that I wasn't aware of. So hopefully everybody else attending has too. We've got, just doing a quick time sheet, we've got 5-6 minutes left, so probably time for a couple of questions. Lucy, can I just check with you? I've got a couple of questions here that have been sent directly through to myself, but have you got anything that's been flagged up to yourself?
No, there's nothing in the chat. So if you want to do those questions, and then if anyone does have anything, please feel free to either unmute yourself or to pop something into the chat. Perfect.
Okay, super. Got one here from somebody attending who, Georgie, this would be for yourself, that's interested in the idea of the returnship. Have you got any idea how they find out about who offers these returnships?
Right, that's a good question. Yeah, there are sort of many kind of blue chip companies and some more unusual companies. I did a search recently to find them, and they're not always like on one set website, but there are a few kind of recruitment companies that specialize in that area and that have listings of current ones. So the ones that I found, the best places to look at, the womenreturners.com, that website, Working Mums websites, and the Return Hub. They seem to be the main ones that keep a track of current vacancies for returnships, and they are all on that slide that I had with all the recent websites. So you could go on there and see what's current. But you may just do a sort of Google search as well for returnships. For example, if you're in financial services, or that I saw some interestingly for like Sky and Amazon as well, some of those. So you could do a Google search and see what comes up in your industry, and you may find, because they will be advertised on the individual company websites as well. But yeah, for a listing, that would be the best place to go.
Again, Georgie, Emma, thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much for your questions there. I almost wish we had more time, because I think we could probably get lots of questions coming out of this as well. Just as Georgie mentioned, you can complete your strengths and skills assessments on the platform, access all the resources as well, and link up with a career coach for one-to-one support. But in the meantime, thank you so much. I hope this has been really useful for you. I know it's always a really helpful topic for everybody at whatever stage they're at bringing up their young people. So thank you for attending, and we'll hopefully see you again soon at one of our next webinars.